February 25, 1942, 2:25 in the morning. The air raid sirens of Los Angeles began to scream. Within seconds, the city went dark. Every light, every lamp, every neon sign on the Sunset Strip went black by order of the military. Thousands of volunteer air raid wardens grabbed their helmets and sprinted to their posts across Los Angeles County. Searchlights raked the night sky in long, sweeping beams. And then the guns opened up. Anti-aircraft batteries across the city unleashed a torrent of fire into the darkness above one of the largest metropolitan areas in the United States. Tracer rounds streaked orange through the black sky. Shell bursts bloomed like brief white flowers over the rooftops of Hollywood, Santa Monica, and Long Beach. Hundreds of thousands of residents were jolted awake, many of them pouring into the streets to watch despite strict blackout orders. The sound was deafening. The spectacle was unlike anything that city had ever witnessed. There was only one problem. There was no enemy. No bombs were dropped. No enemy planes were shot down. No invasion force was ever found. By the time daylight came, the United States Army's own Western Defense Command issued a statement acknowledging that no bombs had been dropped and no aircraft had been destroyed. The guns had been firing at nothing. The Battle of Los Angeles is one of the strangest and most revealing episodes of the entire Second World War. It is a story about fear, about the fog of war, and about how a nation wound tight with anxiety can convince itself that it is under attack when the skies are empty. And that anxiety began with Pearl Harbor. On December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched a surprise attack on the United States Naval Base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The assault killed more than 2,400 Americans, wounded nearly 1,200 more, and destroyed or damaged much of the Pacific Fleet. The country declared war the following day. In a single morning, the United States entered World War II, and Americans on the West Coast suddenly found themselves living on the edge of what felt like a very exposed frontier. The Pacific Ocean, which had always seemed like a vast and reassuring buffer, now felt dangerously thin. Imperial Japan had proven it was capable of striking American territory with lethal precision. The question was not whether Japan would strike again. For millions of Americans in California, Oregon, and Washington, the questions were where and when. This fear was not entirely irrational. In the weeks following Pearl Harbor, Japanese submarines did conduct a sustained campaign against American merchant shipping along the Pacific coast. Vessels were torpedoed and shelled in waters close to shore. Ships like the SS Cynthia Olsen and the SS Montebello were sunk. Others were damaged. These were not distant naval engagements happening somewhere in the open ocean. They were happening within sight of the California coastline. Military personnel and inexperienced radar operators, still unfamiliar with their equipment and still learning to distinguish threats from noise, reported phantom contacts with alarming frequency. Fishing boats were mistaken for enemy warships. Logs floating in the water were logged as periscopes. Whales were reported as submarines. The Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, warned the American public that they should prepare to accept what he called occasional blows from enemy forces. On the evening of February 23, 1942, Americans' fear of an attack were given a very concrete and terrifying confirmation. At approximately 7 in the evening, the Japanese submarine I-17 surfaced off the coast of Santa Barbara, California, near the Ellwood Oil Field. For roughly 20 minutes, the submarine's crew fired more than a dozen shells from its deck gun at the oil field's installations. The damage was limited. Storage facilities and a few derricks were struck, but the main gasoline storage tanks that had been the primary targets were left intact. No one was killed. In purely military terms, the shelling of Ellwood was a minor incident, but symbolically, it was enormous. It was the first time that the continental United States had been attacked by a foreign military power in the current war. Japan had now reached the American mainland. Whatever slim psychological comfort people had drawn from the idea that the Pacific coast was still safely beyond enemy reach was now gone. The following day, February 24th, the Office of Naval Intelligence issued a formal warning. It stated that an attack on mainland California could be expected within the next 10 hours. That evening, observers near defense plants in the Los Angeles area reported seeing flares and strange blinking lights in the sky. A precautionary alert was issued at 7:18 that evening, and air raid wardens were mobilized. That alert was lifted 3 hours later when nothing materialized. Shortly after 2 in the morning on February 25th, military radar picked up what appeared to be an unidentified contact, roughly 120 miles west of Los Angeles. Anti-aircraft batteries were placed on alert at 2:15. By 2:25, air raid sirens were wailing across Los Angeles County. A full blackout was ordered. The city went dark. At 2:43, observers near Long Beach reported planes in the area. A few minutes later, a Coast Artillery colonel reported spotting approximately 25 aircraft at 12,000 feet over the city of Los Angeles. Military fighter aircraft from the 4th Interceptor Command were placed on alert, but commanders made the decision to keep them on the ground. They were waiting for a clearer picture of what was actually happening before committing their limited air assets. That clearer picture never came. At 3:16 in the morning, observers over Santa Monica reported seeing a balloon carrying a red flare drifting through the sky. 4 batteries of anti-aircraft artillery immediately opened fire on it, and from that moment, Los Angeles erupted. Guns across the city began firing. Battery after battery joined in, some responding to actual sightings, others simply following the sound and muzzle flash of adjacent units. The 37th Coast Artillery Brigade fired 50 caliber machine guns and 12.8-pound anti-aircraft shells into the sky. The barrage was thunderous, sustained, and almost completely uncoordinated. By the time it wound down at 4:14 in the morning, American forces had pumped more than 1,400 rounds of anti-aircraft ammunition into the sky, above one of the largest cities in the United States. What the witnesses saw, or believed they saw, during those hours defied any coherent explanation. Reports flooded into military command centers, describing swarms of planes ranging in number from just 1 to several hundred. Altitude estimates ranged from a few thousand feet to over 20,000 feet. Speed estimates varied from very slow to over 200 miles per hour. Some witnesses described balloons. Others described aircraft of various types. The reports were, in the words of one official Army analysis, hopelessly at variance. Military historians later concluded that much of the confusion was self-generating. Once the guns started firing, their own shell bursts were caught by the sweeping searchlights and reflected back to observers on the ground, who mistook the glowing explosions for enemy aircraft. The more the guns fired, the more targets they appeared to create. It was a feedback loop of panic, light, and gunpowder. Ernie Pyle, one of the most respected war correspondents in the country, was in Los Angeles that night. He watched the entire barrage from the ground and later wrote that he was never able to make out a single airplane in the sky. Bill Henry, another veteran correspondent who was also present, said the same. These were trained observers with professional experience watching wartime events. Neither one saw an enemy plane. The all-clear was finally sounded at 7:21 that morning, and in the daylight, the damage assessment began. It was not the kind of damage anyone had expected. Not a single enemy aircraft had been found. Not a single enemy bomb had been discovered. The only destruction in the city had come from American shells raining back down on American neighborhoods. Anti-aircraft shrapnel had shattered windows across Los Angeles, damaged homes and commercial buildings, and left craters in roads and yards. 5 civilians were dead. 3 had been killed in automobile accidents during the chaos of the blackout. 2 others had died from heart attacks, possibly from the shock and terror of the night's events. The political fallout began almost immediately. Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox held a press conference and declared that the entire incident had been a false alarm, the result of what he called war nerves. He attributed the barrage to anxiety, panic, and a hair trigger that had been pulled prematurely on a city wound tight with fear. Secretary of War Henry Stimson offered a different version. He stated that 15 unidentified aircraft had in fact appeared over Los Angeles, and he speculated that they were either light planes launched from Japanese submarines offshore or commercial aircraft operating from secret enemy airfields in California or Mexico. These two statements, contradicting each other at the highest levels of the American government, ignited a firestorm of public suspicion. Newspapers seized on the contradiction. The Los Angeles Times, which had published a photograph purportedly showing searchlights illuminating an airborne object as shell bursts exploded around it, speculated openly that a cover-up was underway. The paper ran the image prominently, and it became one of the most widely discussed photographs of the war. Members of Congress demanded answers. Representative Leland Ford of California wanted to know whether the incident had been a practice raid, a deliberate attempt to frighten civilians, or simple military incompetence. In Congress and in the press, the Army and Navy could not agree on what had happened. The Washington Post published a sharp editorial criticizing the military's stubborn silence in the face of widespread public uncertainty. After the war ended in 1945, Japan was asked directly whether it had sent any aircraft over Los Angeles on the night of February 25, 1942. The answer was unambiguous. Japan confirmed that it had not dispatched any planes to the Los Angeles area at the time of the incident. Japanese military records contain no operation, no mission, and no aircraft over Southern California that night. The mystery of what triggered the event was not formally resolved for decades. In 1983, the United States Office of Air Force History conducted a thorough review of all available evidence and reached a conclusion. The initial alarm, the analysis found, was most likely caused by meteorological weather balloons that had been released over Los Angeles at approximately 1 in the morning on February 25th. This conclusion was supported by an observation that the official Army analysis had noted even at the time. Anti-aircraft artillery units had been formally criticized in the aftermath for firing at targets that moved too slowly to have been aircraft. Weather balloons, drifting on the wind, moved at precisely the kind of slow, erratic speed that a weather balloon would move. Once the initial rounds were fired, the situation cascaded. Shell bursts lit up by searchlights became new targets. The battle fed itself until the ammunition was spent, and the morning light made the emptiness of the sky impossible to deny. The famous photograph published in the Los Angeles Times turned out to be an additional layer of the story, rather than evidence of a genuine threat. Researchers who gained access to the original negatives, housed in the Department of Special Collections at UCLA, determined that the image had been heavily retouched before publication. Photo retouching was a standard industry practice in 1942, done routinely to improve contrast and clarity in black and white newspaper photographs. The dramatic image of searchlights converging on what appears to be a solid object was largely the product of a darkroom technician's hand, not the lens of a camera. The photograph was not faked in the sense of being fabricated, but it had been enhanced in ways that made an ambiguous scatter of light and smoke appear far more solid and defined than the original negative showed. The UFO community has pointed to that photograph for decades as evidence of extraterrestrial visitation, arguing that what Los Angeles gunners were firing at was not a Japanese plane and not a weather balloon, but something else entirely. The retouched image has appeared in countless books, documentaries, and online discussions advancing this theory. Historians and researchers have consistently pushed back on this interpretation, pointing to the documented retouching process, the absence of any corroborating physical evidence, and the straightforward explanation of balloons and mass panic. But the Battle of Los Angeles did not end with the all-clear signal, or even with the newspaper stories that followed. Its most profound and lasting consequence was still unfolding even as Knox and Stimson traded contradictory press statements. 6 days before the battle, on February 19, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt had signed Executive Order 9066. That order authorized the Secretary of War and designated military commanders to remove anyone they deemed a threat from designated military areas along the West Coast. The order did not name any specific group by nationality or ancestry. It did not need to. Within weeks, it was applied almost exclusively to one community. More than 110,000 people of Japanese descent living on the west coast of the United States, the vast majority of them American citizens or legal permanent residents, were forcibly removed from their homes and relocated to internment camps in the interior of the country. They were given as little as 48 hours' notice. They could take only what they could carry. Their farms, their businesses, their homes, and their savings were lost. They were held in remote, fenced, guarded facilities surrounded by barbed wire for years. The atmosphere of fear generated by the Ellwood shelling, the Battle of Los Angeles, and weeks of submarine attacks on Pacific shipping had created the political conditions in which such a mass removal could be carried out with relatively little public opposition. A poll conducted in March of 1942 found that a majority of Americans supported the internment of Japanese Americans regardless of their citizenship status. The United States government formally acknowledged the injustice of the internment in 1988, when Congress passed the Civil Liberties Act. The law stated that a grave injustice had been done to Japanese American citizens and resident aliens, and it authorized a payment of $20,000 to each surviving internee. President Gerald Ford had formally rescinded Executive Order 9066 in 1976, and in 1988, President Ronald Reagan issued a public apology on behalf of the government. The property losses suffered by Japanese Americans as a result of the internment were estimated in 1983 at approximately $1.3 billion in net income and property, not accounting for the decades of compounded loss that followed. The Battle of Los Angeles, then, is not simply a curiosity, a strange footnote, or an amusing case of wartime hysteria. It is a window into the machinery of fear, the way that genuine threats mixed with rumor, panic, and institutional failure can produce consequences that reach far beyond one chaotic night of anti-aircraft fire over a darkened city. The only confirmed casualties were American. The most lasting damage was done not to any aircraft, foreign or domestic, but to over 100,000 people who had never posed a threat to anyone, whose only crime in the eyes of the government was their ancestry. The Battle of Los Angeles as a night of thunder and fire, aimed at an empty sky over a land full of fear. Subscribe to World War II, Steel and Power for more great stories from this monumental era.